Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this webinar co-presented by Emerging Minds and Mental Health Professionals Network. My name's Chris Dolman. I'm really delighted to be joining you for this webinar with the curious title of Shrinking Problems with Children and Families. Part of my work here at Emerging Minds is developing resources around that can support practitioners in relation to working with children and families. So I'm especially pleased to be a part of this webinar tonight and joining so many of you that have linked in to this event. So thank you so much for putting the time aside for that. As we proceed, I would like to acknowledge that that I'm on Kaurna land, and more broadly acknowledge, on behalf of Emerging Minds and Mental Health Professionals Network, acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands across Australia upon which our webinar presenters and participants are located. We wish to pay respect to elders past and present and future for the memories, the traditions, the cultures and the hopes of Indigenous Australia. So yes, welcome to this webinar, and this is the sixth and final webinar in this third series that we're presenting in relation to child and infant mental health. As I said, co-presented by Emerging Minds and MHPN. We've already had a number of terrific webinars this series so far, and we're looking forward to presenting another series in the coming months as well, featuring a really diverse and rich range of topics, including working with Aboriginal children and families, a couple of webinars around those themes, as well as practices for ensuring that children do not remain invisible when working with parents in adult-focused services. Working with parents of infants and toddlers is another topic, as well as a topic we're calling Looking Back to the Present and Forward in Work with Children and Parents, which is really about intergenerational disadvantage, intergenerational mental health, and responding to those circumstances that families face. And also a future webinar around strategies for case formulation in working with children and families as well. So thanks very much again for joining us, and that's a bit about what's ahead as well. So I'd like to also just outline a little bit about how to use the platform for those of you that aren't so familiar with that. You'll see in some icons, we'd really encourage your contribution to the chat box. It's a terrific interactive element of these webinars. So if you've got some reflections that you'd like to share with the rest of the audience, please record those and offer those to your fellow participants using the purple icon as well as the dark blue icon as well. If you have a question for the panel, perhaps that's prompted by their presentations, we'd really welcome those. Thanks so much for those who've already submitted questions as well, and we look forward to further questions coming in through the night, which we'll respond to a bit later this evening as well. The light blue icon gives you the chance to access all the resources that accompany tonight's webinar, the case study, the panelist biographies and other supporting resources as well. There's also a icon for you to click to respond to a survey that we have. That obviously helps us hear more about your experience of this webinar and helps us get better at what we do with these. So it'd be great if you could spend some time doing that for us as well. And if you have any technical troubles, the green icon will help reload the page for you as well. So as we continue, I'd like to just speak a bit to some of the learning outcomes, the themes that we'll be addressing tonight. We'll be discussing and supporting your reflections around how to enable children to describe problems in their own terms and in ways that are meaningful and useful for them, that acknowledge and honour their voices and meanings and understanding. Impacting on their lives, and not just how they're impacting, but the limits of those impacts on their lives as well, so that children's strengths and skills and know-how and what's important to them can be further explored and made useful in our work with kids. Also, we'll be talking a bit about how to understand the problems that children and families face in the broader social context in which they live their lives, and so that that can support our efforts to minimise shame for children as well, and minimise any blame they might be feeling in relation to the problems that they're facing as well. And also, we hope to be sort of speaking a bit about the theme around helping children to notice difference in their life, how problems change, how problems shrink, and their complicity in that, what they're doing to be bringing about these shifts in problems that they're contending with. I hope that gives you a bit of a sense of what's ahead for this next 75 minutes or so, and as I said, promises to be a really rich time. Okay, so it's my pleasure to introduce you to the panel tonight, and you've already had a chance to read their biographies, short bios of their backgrounds and experiences. So I won't reiterate those now, but instead we're going to ask them to speak in a different way than giving a run through of their bio. And just so I've got a question for each of them. And firstly, welcome to you, Emi. It's lovely to have you joining us tonight, and thanks again for your contribution to the work of Emerging Minds in relation to children's mental health and wellbeing as one of our family partners. For you as a parent of children that have consulted with practitioners, what is it that has you being interested in kind of contributing to forums such as this, and joining with practitioners in speaking about these themes? What is it about that for you?
Oh, thanks, Chris. I think it's just a really good opportunity to give an on-the-ground perspective that just brings depth to the discussions that are going to come out of this, and the learning as well, a perspective that is quite unique.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think that certainly really reflects what Emerging Minds values about the different realms of knowledge that we all bring to this area. And so, thanks so much for, in anticipation, for your contribution ahead. And welcome. And welcome to you too, Jamie. Thanks again for your contribution to this webinar tonight. And, Jamie, as a psychologist, what is it that draws you or continues to draw you to this area of work, of working with children and families? I know you could probably talk about that for 75 minutes, actually, what it is that continues to draw you back to working with kids and their families. But just briefly, how would you describe that?
Oh, thank you, Chris. Look, you're right. I could speak about this for all our webinar time tonight, but I won't. I find that what intrigues me about this work is on a daily basis, session by session, when I'm thinking about my work with children in these ways that we'll be talking about tonight, it continues to, I'm truly surprised, delighted, amazed by the knowledge and the resources available to children, what they can really bring into the room, and to help me with helping them with the problems that they've faced. So I suppose the short version is it keeps me invigorated to be able to hear what young people bring into the room with them, as well as the problems that they want to work.
Yeah, great. Isn't that so wonderful that we can talk about our work in ways that actually is about invigoration, I think, and to find ways of working that kind of support some of those hopes we might have for this work. So, thanks, Jamie, for that. And, looking forward to what you bring as well to this discussion. And welcome, Carolyn Markey. Lovely to have you joining us as well.
Hi there.
Hi, And Carolyn, for you as a family therapist, as a therapist that works with children and families and all sorts of combinations of folks, I guess. For you, what is it that kind of keeps you sort of full of anticipation and on the edge of your seat as you start meeting with children and families?
I think whenever I start working with a child, as I did today, I think for me it's a commitment to finding with them a creative way for children to believe that they're not on their own, for them to be able to join somehow with caregivers against what they're up against. And that's a challenging and, as Jamie said, intriguing kind of quest, really, because it's so important that kids aren't positioned as alone in the huge issues that they often face, and that can be invigorating to be able to find that way in a non-shaming and non-blaming way.
Yeah. And so significant, isn't it, for children to sort of be in conversations where shame and blame is not added to, but in fact, shifted in some way. So thanks very much for that, and look forward to what you've got to sort of contribute later on as well. So so folks, as I've already mentioned, the focus, the theme, the topic of tonight is, or the title is, shrinking problems with children and their families, and we have a case study to kind of bounce off of and reflect on that you've had access to in relation to Ava. Ava's 11 years old, and I guess that's the kind of the age range that we're sort of speaking about is, children from 4 to 12. We've sort of got that whole range of children in mind as we're all speaking tonight. And you would have read from the case study about some of Ava's circumstances, that as an 11-year-old, she's been subjected to bullying at school and like in person as well as online, and this is having impacts on her life, like less inclined to go to school and feeling anxious and having sick feelings and wanting to stay home from school as well, which was contrary to perhaps what her mother and GP and others perhaps thought was best for her as well. Monica, her mum, has been seeking to respond to these circumstances as well with very good intent, and but it's also feeling as though that some further assistance and further support for Ava is required. So she's seeking consultations for Ava in relation to this. So this case study, we'll be using this as a basis to be talking about this theme around shrinking problems. And we'll be keeping one eye on the particular presenting issue, but also a broader eye on some of the broader themes that can be applied to no matter what the presenting issue is that children come to consult with practitioners about. So, so it's time to hear from our panellists now, and we're going to start with Emi. So, Emi, thanks very much for your involvement tonight. What are some key things that you want to sort of be speaking to tonight?
Thanks, Chris. I wanted to talk firstly about some ideas around language. Ava seems overwhelmed with what's going on, and she just wants things to be normal. But it does seem that the bullying isn't going to go away. So I would want the practitioner at first instance to recognise these conflicting feelings that Ava has. By listening to the words that Ava is using to describe these events, her emotions and feelings, and the people in her life around this issue, the practitioner can then model some of Ava's language back to her. This validates her feelings and her story and helps to build trust. The practitioner is listening and emphasising. I think it would also be helpful for the practitioner to help Ava to find ways to describe what is going on when she's lost for words or descriptions. Having a good language, even if it's a more clinical one, such as using words like cyberbullying, anxiety, this can help Ava to describe the situation to others with more confidence. Having a language that's built on alongside the practitioner will also allow her to talk about the issues without her mum present or to others, particularly when her views don't align with the people that she's talking to. And then if we look at problems in real time, so how her skills are being built on, I think kids often have a range of skills that they already bring to a problem, and they often don't realise that this is the case. Ava would already be using skills and strategies to manage these situations. So if I were Monica, I'd want to see the practitioner help Ava to identify what she has brought to the problem already and if that has been useful or not. Ava seems reluctant to talk about the bullying with her friends. It seems she's trying to underestimate the impact that this is having on her. So I'd like to see the practitioner gently help her break down what's happening and then identify what strategies she has used for different aspects of the issue. As a mum, I want to fix my kids' problems straight away, and that often means that I throw a whole lot of suggestions at them. This can be useful, but ultimately I want my kids to be able to identify what their own answers are and then be able to expand on them with other suggestions. Ava also seems to be getting advice from others which may or may not be helpful. So she really needs to work out which are her own and how they're helping her so that she can own these skills. I think it's important for Ava to know the practitioner knows she is able to find her own solutions. I'd want the practitioner to know that she isn't just giving more ideas, but actually sitting with Ava, and that I would want Ava to know that she's coming up with these ideas for herself with the help of the practitioner through conversations. And this allows Ava to have agency. This might be difficult with Monica being present. I know as a mum, I'd be feeling really concerned about this issue, and I'd have concerns about Ava's conflicting emotions over it, such as wanting to miss school, not wanting to tell a friend. So Ava seems to be really conflicted and confused about how to manage this issue, and it's also huge. So I find it very hard as a mum to be patient and quiet and let Ava and the practitioner gently come around to ideas. I'd want to have the solutions now. So I think this is something to keep in mind that, you know, as a mum, I'd be really like a bull at the gate, and this might not be helpful. So if we look to Monica, as a parent, this is really an upsetting issue, and it's hard for a parent to navigate this territory. It happens away from us at school or on the computer. We're really not present. So we're really required to put a large amount of our children's safety in someone else's hands, knowing the terrible and devastating results that this issue and similar ones can have for our children. So I think it's important for the practitioner to really acknowledge these fears and concerns that are very real for me. I'd want them to be able to speak to me away from Ava so that they can have a free and open conversation about my fears and to listen to me frankly and talk about the problem frankly. Doing this allows me to hand over some of my control of the situation and the practitioner to, allows me to hand over some of my fears about the situation and control of the situation to the practitioner because I've built up a bit of trust with the practitioner. I think it would also be helpful for the practitioner to help Ava and Monica work out their own strategies, such as the role that I can have as a parent in this. For instance, it could be that mum listens to me talk about my feelings but doesn't talk to the school or others. So I become a part of the solution, but not a big part, but definitely a part. I'm the front line of the problem, so it's important for me to be involved in the strategies and solutions in some way. Shame is a big issue. In this issue, bullying, it's so damaging because it shames and humiliates. It makes the problem about the victim. It's personalised and it's direct. I think it's important for the practitioner to talk to Ava about shame and guilt to allow her to break apart how these two emotions are used to cause harm. This can allow Ava to learn what these emotions feel like, and she would be feeling them, I'm sure. Having an understanding of this allows Ava to externalise these feelings and to make them more manageable. Shame and guilt are so difficult because they are so often kept secret, which then intensifies these feelings. By talking about it, identifying where and how it is impacting Ava's life, she can start to take away some of the power that they hold. And then finally, if we look at shrinking problems, Ava seems to have an idea already about the problem and how it's affecting her, and she also has strategies that she's putting in place already. Some of Ava's thinking doesn't align with mum or her teachers. From my experience, I often have a different level of concern about issues affecting my children than my children do. I think it's important to identify this mismatch in some way. Talking about where Ava's ideas and feelings differ from others will help the practitioner to have a conversation about what tools she has used to manage this issue. This will help Ava to see her strengths and to be able to recognise these for future use. The skills that she learns in this problem can be put to other problems, and it would be good for the practitioner to work with Ava to understand how these skills cross over and perhaps how she has already used them in previous problem solving. The practitioner can also help Ava to identify solutions that are adult-based and fixed, such as not missing school, and ones that she has agency over and can work herself. This will allow Ava to take ownership of the problem and the solutions, to know what she is bringing to the issue herself, and to accept the adult fixed rules that she needs to acknowledge and work with. This will also allow Ava to have the ability to talk about the issue with people in her life who want to help, such as her mum, and to learn the skills of problem solving with another adult in a way that keeps her agency intact. By learning this within the safe and professional relationship with her practitioner and herself, Ava can then transport those to other relationships, such as with her mum, her teacher, and her friends. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Emi. Yeah, I really appreciated so much of what you had to say, particularly your interest in the skills and strategies or responses that Ava's already perhaps drawing on in response to these circumstances, and the interest of practitioners in trying to bring these more to light. So, and also when you, I think the phrase that really stood out, you said, about Monica, perhaps putting Ava's circumstances or well-being in someone else's hands, and I think that's really interesting sentiment for practitioners, for me as a practitioner to be thinking about actually, and how I might respond, to that if I get that sense. So thanks very much for that, and certainly, folks, if there's things that have stood out to you from what Emi had said, that perhaps you've got a question for Emi, please pop that in the question box. We'd welcome that. So, Jamie, for you, I'd love to hear your perspectives around responding to Ava and her circumstances.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Chris. So certainly from my perspective, this slide which I'm showing up here, which is available through Emerging Minds, really encapsulates some of the important ethics of work, the context of our practice that I'm hoping to talk about now, in terms of the ways that we can welcome children's agency and acknowledge their context when we're doing the work with them. So, what does all this mean? So, for Ava, what this would suggest is that we're going to need to think carefully about what the problem is in her terms. So, also that means that tuning into the ways in which she acknowledges this problem has shifted in her terms as well. When this problem has been shrunk enough, Ava is going to be really important in this, because certainly from one perspective, especially as a psychologist, it might well be tempting to think about tuning into, is this anxiety when I'm looking at this case study, or is it the effects of bullying? It's an oppositional behaviour, social skills. There are a number of ways in which we can start to conceptualize this case study that's described here with Ava. But certainly when we're able to shift our perspective and to welcome children's agencies and acknowledge the context in the ways that this slide shows, I think it produces a much more meaningful engagement with the child, with their family, and also hopefully it makes for much more meaningful change in that young person's life. So here's an example of what I mean, or what I would be asking. I'd be interested in hearing from Ava. A question along the lines of, I don't know what this problem looks like when it's around. You know way more about it than me. Would you mind using your imagination to draw what the problem looks like to you, please? And don't worry about making the drawing perfect. So those kinds of, hopefully, invitations for her to use her knowledge of the problem to really help us to see how she sees this affecting her life. It will also shift us away from categories into context. So instead of thinking about, and here's a previous young person that I've worked with, where you might say, oh, separation anxiety disorder, yeah, developmentally inappropriate. Or her drawing of this was, well, the problem for me is that I've got this keep mum close kind of love. And here is a drawing of her keeping mum close, and you'll notice that they're smiling, they're happy, yes, and that was also the problem in that she needed to keep mum close because of a realistic fear of what would happen if she was not around mum because of what happened with mum previously when mum was near dad, where violence was used in the relationship, and the young person didn't see it, but she certainly saw the effects of it afterwards. So that opens up that conversation and brings forward her knowledge much more skillfully. So equally, here's the temper ball. So this was a younger fellow than Ava is in this example. And so his illustration of how he saw the problem of mum and dad separating, and after separation, dad continually undermining mum and trying to niggle at her, and being very upset and angry with how the mum had moved on and changed her life after separation. This was the temper ball, and that was a much more meaningful way to start to open up the conversation for him, rather than just thinking about it, this is like an adjustment disorder with clearly a disturbance in conduct. The temper ball was a much more graphic description of this problem, and I'm happy to say that the temper ball is safely locked away in an undisclosed location in Adelaide's northern suburbs, so I'm hoping that it stays there to this moment now. So why are we doing this? We're doing this because as therapists, I believe that we have like a home team advantage, meaning the way that we set up our session times, the legislation we use, the record keeping we do, even the chair that we sit in. Look, here's me yesterday at work, and this is my kind of therapy space. Now, I'm worried that if we as practitioners do not notice our own practicing context and the privilege that comes with it, then young people like Ava will find themselves really at a disadvantage as if they were the away team coming into our home ground, and finding it a much more confined space for them to use their agency, for them to describe their context, for them to show us what they've done previously. Okay, so what I put on some suggestions here are some ways in which the therapeutic frame, so our practice context, can be made much more therapeutic. And I can come back to talk about any of those more at a later time. But certainly what it would mean for Ava would be, for example, really talking with her about how I as a practitioner would want to do the work with her and how that relates to the hopes that I've got. So who's in the room and why? So I would really like to then be clear with her. This is my practice here. How does this sound to you, that we can spend some time individually together, individually or together with mum? So really being clear with her, almost like a consenting process, and really getting her buy-in for how we're going to do that work together. Because let's face it, in a sense, children and young people are mandated clients. Ava is a mandated client. She didn't wake up one morning and choose to come and see any of us. This is her mum has concerns about her, or maybe the school has said Ava needs to speak to someone about this. So we need to really acknowledge that that's the context of the practice in which we are operating. And these 4 key questions: who's the client, who's in the room, who is the problem, whose solution has power. I think talking through that, perhaps in supervision or just in our own mind when we're kind of formulating, thinking about what's going on here, that will have us starting to attend to some of the things that I heard. For example, I know Emi said earlier on where she said something along the lines of, as a mum presenting her child to services, she would want solutions now. And so that sense of pressure, that discomfort that most parents, if not all parents, would have in seeing their child distressed and hoping for something different and hoping for it quite quickly. So that might well have people acting in different ways. That sense of pressure might even have Ava shutting down a bit, especially because she may well feel the shame that I know Emi also talked about, which would prevent her from talking more openly. Hence why using some things like drawings, might make it easier for Ava to talk about this problem. And also who's in the room, who's not in the room. So absent but implicit in this case study is Ava's dad. And certainly as a practitioner, we would need to think about what role, if any, does he have in how this problem is operating now, because I see there's reference to him previously, or even how he could be a resource going forward. How can he be brought into the room, not even necessarily literally, but even metaphorically, and others as well, such as we hear talk of Sophia and the pen. So they can be in the room without literally being in the room as well. So just on my last slide now, in terms of thinking about what we're doing, we're shrinking the problem, not the person. So what does that mean? So start off with, we're going to also, I would suggest with Ava from early days, we're going to be inviting her to tell us how will you know when this problem has been shrunk enough. So we wouldn't use that literal language, but we've been using language in all kinds of it in terms of how would things be different for you when you know that you don't need to come to see me anymore, or how would things be different for you that you would feel as though some of the ideas that you've come up with are really making a difference to your life. So we would start to use, of course, some kind of scaling questions, but I would imagine for a young person of this age, you need to not just doing strongly agree or disagree or not at all there or there. We might want to use, like, on a scale from like life sucks to life is sweet, where would you say life is for you right now? Oh, okay, it's about there, is it? Tell me about. So that would be some of the ways in which we would start to engage and open up, and also have Ava acknowledge where she is right now, where she would rather be. And then just finally, certainly in some agencies, more formal, standardized outcome measures are mandated. So I'm also interested in using those outcome measures like strengths and difficulties questionnaire. I'm very interested in using those in such a way that it isn't the truth. It's not like the Holy Grail. The SDQ says, yes, the problem has been solved sufficiently to announce it. People can think about those changes on standardized measures being like a story of numbers. This is something that my former colleague Claire also talked about. The story of numbers is, if I look at what these numbers are telling me on the SDQ or whatever change measure we're looking at, they're saying to me that things have got a lot easier for you in the past month. What do you think about that? And so that would be how I'd be interested to have Ava noticing change, but also Monica as well, because they may notice change happening in different ways, and measures such as SDQ can really, I think, open up those conversations, but without dominating those conversations and taking over whether change has happened or not. So, Chris, if I can hand back to you.
Thanks so much, Jamie. Yeah, appreciated so much of richness that you've brought to this conversation. A number of things stand out to me, including your attention to what you've called making the therapeutic frame therapeutic, and certainly has me thinking a bit about the more attention that I could be paying to some of those considerations as well, and working with children and families. So thanks very much for that. And again, everyone, if there are questions you've got for Jamie, like him to clarify aspects of what he's spoken about, please submit them through the question box. So and Carolyn, welcome. And again,
hello there.
Hi. I'd love to hear your perspective on responding to Ava and Monica's circumstances here.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I certainly think going last has its advantages because so much of what Emi and Jamie spoke about really resonate. And particularly, I believe that when we're working with children, we can't escape that they're often not voluntary participants. And, they're walking into an unfamiliar environment, and so I have a commitment to bringing, we are in our home ground and we want to really bring their known and familiar world into our space. And we can only do that in collaboration with the parents or carers of these children. So very much, parents and carers and significant adults are part of the solution. So how I've come to do this through people that have taught me this is to always start my work with children before I see them by writing a letter that I have collaborated with a carer about, such as the one that you can see on the screen, where they get to know a little bit about this thing that I do, and then I find out through their carer what the problem may be and tell them many of the things that I might have worked with other children. So already there's a lot of shared knowledge in the letter and letting them know that I'm familiar with some of these issues. But what's most important is that I'm asking them to tell me more about parts of their life that aren't problematic, because it's in hearing about those parts of a child's life that we start to listen to the skills and knowledge that they may be able to apply to the problem. So, for example, with Ava, I'm just thinking of a child that is like in a situation of Ava, where a child was talking to me about the thing that they loved at school was a project that they were doing, and they had to choose. I'm bringing their world into the therapy room very intentionally, and they had to choose a favourite animal and a feared animal. Now, this was just not rapport setting, but really finding out about this child's world with the parent listening in. But what happened because of that, this child named the problem, which was a bullying problem, as the smelly hyena problem, because it was something that was familiar to their world, but they didn't like it. So we've got language of that child that is not, being on the end of bullying or peer abuse. So the bullying is the problem, and Ava's not the problem. It's far more experience near to her, or actually it's the smelly hyena problem. And that's only come about by hearing a little more about her broader context. I think also, particularly when we're talking about, peer abuse or any abuse, that there are always issues of politics and justice. We want to really map where the problem comes from widely. And so what I found out was asking about the effects of this problem on her friendships and on life at home. And even though for Ava, life at home might have been an escape from the bullying, she may not have liked it because, with the family I'm working with at the moment, Mum gets a bit grumpy because she has to try and work online and there's a child at home, so that wasn't too good and she was missing her friends, so it was bittersweet. And then what's also really important is who else knows about this problem. So the problem isn't just individualised, that we're really bringing other supports into the room, obviously significant parents who are concerned, because we're only going to be in a children's life for a matter of, a few hours in their life. We have to find ways that supportive adults can breathe life into the children's skills and knowledge and solutions that they may be coming up with. So by asking questions about, say, for example, this child's friends, what do they think about this bullying problem? What do they do when it happens? So thinking about the idea of bystanders. They think it's unfair, but they still don't do anything because they're too scared to talk to the bullies. This is what we know about, children are so scared about payback. And, with parents to be an onlooker to this, to have that understanding as well. I think, hang on a minute, I just want to pass this. So in terms of, I think, this issue, who else has responsibility when there's teasing and bullying? Obviously other kids, bystanders do, and we need to be working with systems that children are immersed in. So having contact with a school and finding out about the policies that they're using alongside of the parent. The parent may have already done that, but they may have had difficulty in getting the answers they want. So obviously our role as advocates to look at the systems that are in place that may stop a child from having more of a voice. But asking children about, would your teacher be on the side of the smelly hyena or on the side of good friendships? And hopefully this child might say good friendships. and asking the child how these people that are have greater access to influence in this child's life can help. So it's also about shifting the child from being vulnerable to the problem to one of consulting a child about ideas that they might have. So, this would be happening in front of them, where I would be writing down what they're telling me about their life and their ideas. So it's not sort of written on a notebook that is secreted away from them. Also, I think, hang on, also, I think Jamie raised the issue of how the room can be set up so that a child is, not so much in a foreign territory. And I've had much joy in collecting children's knowledges about how to solve problems. So when they walk into a space, asking them to, maybe if they're old enough to read some of these issues on the wall, or what kids have done, so that they get a sense that they're not on their own. So recently, for example, a child was writing a document about how they just have to do the opposite thing to what the bullies think, and then that makes the bullying diminish. Now, this child was captivated by that idea. So rather than us telling children what to do, we just really hold that position of curiosity, and we have also an obligation to share the knowledge that we've had by consulting so many children and families and parents as well, to put parents in touch with other parents who have also been trying to collaborate with their children against particular problems. Okay, so this is just an example of one of those sort of documents that children used to often choose because they found it a little bit quirky. I haven't found any posters on children's mental health that says badness is good, but this really reflects children's really insider knowledge and creativity, and really arouses a sense of curiosity in children to know that other children have been able to shrink problems in collaboration with others around them. So just, coming to an end now, I think when parents are also an audience to their children creating and coming up with ideas, they can really feel a sense of relief that they don't have to be the ones that only create the solutions. So, we might have a living document where children add solutions to particular problems, or where a parent might offer a solution and a child may, for example, recently, I had a child who was telling me that their parent had said, just tell the teacher straight away, and this child couldn't do that because other children would see this. So through this, they decided that they needed to sit at the back of the room so they could email the teacher so that there would be privacy. There's so much that we can do, but what we have to ensure is that we don't sort of colonise the knowledges of parents and carers who really, as Jamie outlined, are putting their child in your hands, and that we must come from a position of cultural respect and curiosity to find out what they've been doing in terms of joining with this child to diminish the problem. So I think I'll just stop there. Thanks.
Thanks again, Carolyn, for bringing those ideas and very particular practices to this discussion, and really love the way you've talked about, circulating children's ideas, their understandings, responses to problems that they're facing, amongst other children, and having children respond to that. We don't have to come empty-handed, do we, to sort of working with children when we have children's knowledge, other children's knowledge alongside of us in relation to those. So, really appreciate your emphasis and descriptions of those things. Thanks a lot. And again, everyone, if you've got questions for Carolyn about particular things she's spoken about, please submit them as well. So thank you already to those people that have been submitting a number of questions, and through the question box. We've had a few coming in, actually, I guess, that really reflect some dilemmas, some challenges that practitioners face in working with children, highlighting different different challenges they face. And there's a question around how do you support a child who is too embarrassed or fearful of discussing the issues that they're coming to you about, or that others have suggested they come to consult with you about? You know, how do you support children in relation who are up against that fear and embarrassment? Emi, for you, like drawing on your experiences, do you have some ideas around that from a parent's perspective, you know, in terms of what would be important from your perspective as practitioners dealt with that dilemma?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think one of the things is to try and normalise the problem so that it doesn't become so big. So try to find a way to kind of put it into everyday terms, just to kind of help that child begin that conversation.
Right.
Even just starting with small parts of it. So starting at the edges and then working in.
So, when you say start with small parts of it, can you say a bit more what you mean by that? Like just parts of the problem that's that the child's facing?
Start with the manageable bits. I mean, I'm assuming that, you know, you as a parent, you'd have some idea of what the issue is, but you also know that the child is really reluctant to talk about it. So kind of start to talk about the bits that you're aware of in a gentle way, and kind of see if you can kind of tease around the edges to get deep into the problem. And also patience. You know, you've got to allow the child to do it in their own time. You know, from my experience, when I've tried to talk to my children about things which are big for them and which they don't want to share with me, I've just got to be patient, and I've got to accept that I might not know all of what's happening, and that's okay. If they can't tell me everything, I've got to be okay with that.
Right. Not always an easy position to hold, I guess, but yeah, that's from something that's really stayed with you from that. Thanks, Emi. What about Carolyn and Jamie, for you? Is there something you'd like to say to complement what
certainly, I suppose what stood out in terms of what Emi says, it's about this sense of readiness, even though a parent often wants things to get better really quickly. I know that's with my own kids when they were younger. And so when, you know, because my work is now office-based, or even if it's home-based, you know, some of the questions we might ask is you know, what sort of maybe got you ready to be able to talk about some of these things, or and also to you know, put this problem in a broader context. So, for example, a child that couldn't stop crying and was incredibly sad and embarrassed about that met with me and her parent, and the reason she was crying was that they had to put, you know, the dog in a dog home because of moving to a smaller house. And we were able to get to a place where it was shining the light on the context that reduced the embarrassment, you know, that it was actually quite an honourable thing to be crying about. The meaning of sadness changed, and in talking more about that, the problem started to shrink. And it was very honouring of the care that the parent had given to them.
Great, thanks, Carolyn. Jamie, did you want to add anything to that, or?
Look, certainly. So the question is how to support reluctant young people to start to describe their experience of the problem. And I have found, I mean, we've talked about the drawings already as a way to start to engage. I've also found, in fact, the young person who did the drawing of the mum and the keep mum close kind of love, because a lot of the thoughts that she had in her mind were so scary and fear-inducing for her, she also didn't really want to say them out loud. But what she was prepared to do was to have me do like a 20 questions game, where I could start to say, okay, I wonder if this is something which relates to, it's about mum. You're worried about something about mum. Yes. And that made it possible for her to, with 20 questions, to start to describe to me the fears that she had, because I think there's research studies showing as well that parents often usually underestimate the amount of troubling thoughts, scary thoughts, anxious thoughts that their children have. Sometimes it's easier for a practitioner to be able to do that when a parent is not in the room, and to start to explore what they're thinking, because the chances are, if they're having trouble saying it out loud in front of in front of a practitioner, it's also going to be hard for them to say that out loud in front of a parent. But also equally, in terms of supporting children to talk about that experience as well, there are lots of cards. In fact, picture this card. Many of the St. Luke's resources, or I know from the online learning, people just collecting cards that you get in pubs. So just images, real prompts, which you can then ask the young person to just talk about, and then start somewhere. It will lead you everywhere. What does this remind you of? What does this picture remind you of? Does this remind you of a person? And then you can slowly start moving towards, how does this relate to mum? Does this remind you of mum? So those will be ways in which I would hope I'd be able to start that conversation with a young person who is finding it hard, who felt maybe shut down by shame, make it easier for them to talk about the problems that they face. Great,
yeah. Thank you all. Yeah, thanks, Jamie, Carolyn, Emi, for those reflections on that. We've had some questions as well about involving parents in these consultations, and a question about, could you say something about involving parents so that children are not shamed and can be supported in the work you're doing, but the child's still your client. I guess that question you asked, Jamie, who is the client? But so the question is around involving parents in ways that aren't shaming but supportive. Carolyn, is there some things that sort of come to mind for you, for example, around that question?
Well, I think significantly this idea that the child isn't the problem, but the problem is the problem, so that we can have, I actually sort of described some of this when I might be first working with a parent, that, one of my hopes in meeting with their child is for embarrassment to be diminished. The child has to sort of be able to be in relationship to the problem rather than seeing themselves as having to get better or more confident or, be more assertive with bullying. So, my hope would be that the parent can join with the child against this thing, so that there's a team that is created that will help the child. So I think that's quite an enormous shift that is done very kind of, I think Jamie's mentioned we can do that not just through talking, but through children making the problem with clay, or through kids drawing the problem, or kids naming the problem as a song, or metaphor is really important as well. So that would be an incredibly important aspect of the work, and just one part of the work that I would do with parents, and for them to come on board with that, and for them to know that it's important for me to know the things that they really obviously cherish about their child, and the things that they make them smile about their child despite, incredibly traumatic things that may be going on. So these are ways that I find really can help parents join with their child against whatever is happening.
Thanks, Carolyn. Yeah. Emi, I was just wondering, for you, from your experience, are there things that you've appreciated in your work with your consultations with practitioners and the consultations your children have had with practitioners, that sort of have enabled you to participate in those in a way that is supportive rather than inadvertently shaming of children, like as if,
Yeah, I think along the lines of what Jamie and Carolyn have already talked about, finding ways that the problem can be externalised, but then sharing how my child kind of talks about that problem. So kind of giving them a way of describing the problem and making it outside of themselves, but then also being able to kind of to hold it in a way in some form of description or language, and then sharing that with me so that we've both got this kind of this descriptive ability to talk about the problem that's outside of the child. And so it becomes, a separate issue that we could come back to. Like say, if it's named the smelly hyena, at the end of the day, I could say, how is the smelly hyena today? So just that kind of, I guess, sharing that descriptive language so that I become a part of that ongoing relationship to the solution.
Great. No, thank you for that as well. Jamie, there's been a question a bit about, along this similar sort of theme and around in terms of a question, how do you go about framing the child's description back to the parent in a way? So perhaps if you've been consulting with the child alone, I guess, that might be the circumstances that have prompted the question. Do you have some responses to that question?
Well, that reminds me of something that Emi said earlier on, that as a parent, as a mum, she was in the front line with this problem that she was consulting around. I think when we're presenting back, either doing some sort of feedback, you might call it, or seeking some sort of input from the parent, collaborating is how I prefer to see it. The parent, a lot of this will already be known and familiar to the parent. So in a sense, some of it will be, I also agree, this is how I see it as well. So it would have been helpful when we're working out in an individual session with the parent beforehand, working out how do you see this problem as having arisen? Why do you think this is how it is? Because that's really helpful to know, because that also will influence how a parent will hear what you try to talk to them about, how you present back what you have done with their child. And again, what Emi said, she's putting her child in someone else's hands to do that. And that's a very vulnerable making situation. And so it is for the child as well. So what I would certainly hope to do, if I was to provide any sort of feedback or commentary or assessment, to be able to, in this therapeutic context, to talk through with the young person, with the child, about these are the sorts of things I've heard you say. How does it sound for you if mum were to know this, or if dad were to know this? And then to break it down bit by bit. And then I would, in my experience, I would say probably 80% of the time, young people are happy for this to be known to their parent, because they also understand, like Carolyn said, I'm only in their lives for a matter of hours over the course of a couple of months. Parents, carers, other people are with them a lot more. So they want to help make that triangle in attachment terms. They want to help us make the connection for them to carry on outside of our session. So I hope that answers the question, Chris.
Yes. I hope it's responded to what the person was asking. I think so, in terms of that. In fact, there's been another question that kind of extends on that a bit as well that's coming. Thank you to everyone that's sending in the questions. But it's in relation to where a child has been, I use the word kind of, influenced to, adopt a particular version understanding of a problem by adults in their life. And this version they've been recruited into, I guess, is not helpful for the child's psychological well-being, right? And therefore a barrier to finding their own voice. And I guess sometimes, this could become apparent in our work with kids, perhaps, using in terms of the descriptions they use. Do you have people? The person's after for some thoughts in how to respond thoughtfully, to those circumstances. Yeah. Is there something, Carolyn, that might come to mind for you in relation to that?
I think about a child that I work with who, I haven't started working, but have worked with children in this situation where they may have been coached into or sort of sucked into believing in gendered violence, for example, that their female parent is to blame for violence that may have been perpetrated against her because she's not maybe good enough or did the right thing, and for the child to disagree with the male parent is very risky, and so to take on that view is almost protective for the child in relation to the father. So, this is not unusual, but I think also to work with, firstly, letting the mother know that this is, sometimes they already know, a tactic of control and maybe maternal alienation, for example, and how the child, when working with the child, letting them know very clearly that I'm not there to side with one parent or the other, but I'm not there to also say that, if particular actions have been named as violence, that they're all right or not, that they're all right. So with the child, I would be asking once again about what it's like. Often they may be a messenger of information too, what it's like for them, getting their position on the problem. There's so much external context to take into consideration. But certainly not wanting to come with a position of the child. If the child gets a sense from me that I'm trying to change their view of their mother from the word go, even though politically I know that's not right, that's not a way to engage the child. I want to understand why they think these particular things and how they came to understand that they thought that mum was to blame for this. And to let them know very clearly that I'm, at that point, it's not that I'm there to tell them that they're right or wrong, but to really understand the meaning of what their views are about and what impact that has on their connection to their dad, their mum, their nana, their other people in their life who might not know or might know about this. So it's a big question, but a really important one. Yeah.
Great. Did you have any additional reflections to complement what Carolyn said, Jamie? Or
yeah, I agree with a lot of what Carolyn says, especially around tuning into gendered violence. It does remind me of some of the contexts of highly conflicted parents after a parental separation as well, who are competing for a child's mind. And it is well worth tuning into and being very curious about with a young person of, and I can hear that's the sort of thing that you're saying. Who else would be saying that sort of thing? Who else might say that about mum? And just to really be curious about that. And I think young people are often much more knowledgeable about why they're being told these things, and to actually, even before supposedly the theory of mind is well established, they understand why different people say different things. So I think young people are a lot more knowledgeable, and we can just really support that by holding on to that curiosity. And just like Carolyn was saying, so I think you really covered it for me. Thank you, Carolyn, with that. Yeah.
Great. And we probably need to finish shortly, but just a question around a similar theme from a couple of people, I guess based on, sometimes they work in circumstances where they haven't had the opportunity to, set the context, perhaps in terms of that home ground advantage meeting or talking with parents beforehand, this kind of thing. How do you have any suggestions for how you go about kind of setting up the home ground or creating a context in those circumstances? So, but maybe could I ask Emi just about that? Like, in terms of your experience, Emi, are there things that have, even though you may not have consulted with the practitioner before actually meeting with them, with your children, or before your children have met with them, are there things that practitioners have done initially that have really contributed to creating that sense of welcome and creating a context where it is possible for your children to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. I can think of one particular case where we'd gone in to see a particular therapist, and we're in a new area, so we didn't really know anyone or them. And we'd had a lot of challenges that we had to work through. But the practitioner started off with just doing like a mind map, like a family tree mind map combination thing, and that was great. You know, it really kind of it allowed us to just kind of almost shout things out, you know, and see it externalized. But it made it not so big, because we came in there like just feeling we had 1,000 things to talk about. But we were able to get through so much in one session, and we didn't come out of it feeling awful either. So that was really, really lovely. And I really felt a part of that too. So, you know, even though I continued in the sessions, I felt I had enough trust with the practitioner to be able to think, well, if they wanted to see my children without me, that would be okay.
Right. Yeah, great. Thanks for that feedback for all of us, really. Yeah, in relation to that. Yeah, okay. There's many other themes for us to explore in relation to this topic, and again, thank you for people that have contributed to this discussion. Yeah, we look forward to finding ways to respond to those questions through other means here at Emerging Minds. So thank you so much for that. So yeah, I guess I'd like to just ask you each for a bit of a what is it? Not a summary, just maybe something that perhaps has stood out to you from what perhaps others have said tonight as well that's caught your attention, or that you found yourself appreciating, or maybe a final kind of key message you'd like to be ensuring is passed on. Yeah, Emi, is there something for you that's stood out tonight? A couple of words around the evening for you.
Yeah. I really loved the drawings of people that Carolyn and Jamie shared, the smelly hyena and the ball at Canton, and just the I can't remember the actual sentence, but the way that one of the child described separation anxiety was just really beautiful, and it reminded me that children have such a really lovely way to describe things which are critical, and it's just really good.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Emi. Yeah, Carolyn, for you, was something particularly kind of caught your attention from what others have spoken about tonight, or where the conversation's gone? Or
yeah, I think I think a couple of things really, like just the things that Emi was saying in terms of the enormous responsibility we have with children to really partner with their carers and to really understand their values and commitments to what they hope, and that we're going to try and find creative ways to back them up. And in contexts where most contexts where people have to evaluate progress, there are such creative ways we can do that too, which I know Jamie's been doing, and that organisations are, really trying to find child-focused and fun ways so children can really see change that sometimes may be invisible initially to them because the problem is so overwhelming. So I really appreciated, being reminded and committed to that as well. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Carolyn. Yeah, Jamie, for you, what's something that's really stood out to you from this conversation?
Thank you, Chris. I had lots of standout phrases and ideas. Definitely something that Emi said around being a frontline worker in her child's problems, and that really has stood out to me. Thank you, Emi, for that. Because parents and their children, carers and their children are in the front line, so there really is. We as practitioners need to acknowledge that and sit with that, and acknowledge also that it's uncomfortable for them, and that's something else that Emi said in terms of now I can understand that that feeling of pressure of wanting results, but also being able to contain and slow things down so that the young person's knowledge is really brought forward. And the way to do that is with those shifts in practice perspective. So look, if I can summarise, Chris, with a limerick, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
There was a webinar chaired by Chris Dolman, which went out to therapists and told them, if you shift your perspective and stop seeing the child as defective, then you can start shrinking those problems.
Thank you very much. And,
good on you, Jamie.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, thank you, Jamie, and not just for limerick, but yeah, for all your richness of your contributions. Thanks again, Carolyn, as well, and Emi. Thank you very much for your ongoing contribution to Emerging Minds. And just as we finish in the next couple of minutes, just to point out that there are further resources and other readings that you can be doing in relation to this topic. We have a number of e-learning courses around the theme of engaging children in practice, and we'd really invite you to be having a look at those and engaging with some of those themes, which are very practice-based courses that include interviews with practitioners, practice demonstrations, reflections from parents, reflections from the child actors involved in the video demonstrations, and contributions from others who have already engaged with the course. I've already outlined a number of other webinars that are coming up as well, but please, take a closer look at some of our other resources as well. So, thanks so much, everyone, for your participation in tonight's event. Please, complete the feedback survey before you log out, the yellow button there. That'd be terrific. There will be statements of attendance that are issued in the coming weeks, and you'll also be sent a link to the recording of this webinar and the other associated resources that go with this. So, I'd just like to be acknowledging that this webinar has been co-produced by Mental Health Professionals Network and Emerging Minds for Emerging Minds and National Workforce Centre for Child Mental Health. The National Workforce Centre for Child Mental Health is funded by the Australian Government Department of Health under the National Support for Child and Youth Mental Health program. So if you'd I'd like to continue these conversations with local practitioners in your area, or maybe, initiating a discussion group, you're very welcome to do that. Mental Health Professionals Network project officers are ready and able to help you establish these groups, these interdisciplinary groups. So please contact Mental Health Professionals Network. The details are on your screen there. There's stacks of these networks around the country. So, again, finally, thank you to everyone. Thank you to people behind the scenes at Mental Health Professionals Network, as well as here at Emerging Minds. And we look forward to your company at future MHPN and Emerging Minds webinars. So we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.